So at this point, what we're going to be doing is continuing with what we started in our skeleton. And if you remember, here I'll just open up that skeleton for us. It didn't really look like much of anything because when we preview it in our browser, all we've got is this. But what we're going to be doing is a little bit more detailed. So I'm just turning to Dreamweaver for a second. Actually, let me go to my Finder for a minute. And you'll notice that I've included now a file here called progress. And this progress file is the one that I will be commencing with. And I'd like you to start with this one as well. The only difference between the progress, and here, look, I'll open it up in a browser, and the previous one was that I have included some content. So you'll notice there's some content in here. We started with the same skeleton that we had before, and I'm just going to show you again. So unlike the previous skeleton, which if I open for you, let me just show you what that looked like again. When we were examining that one, we just wanted to put in the skeleton of our header and our nav and article with nothing inside of it and footer with nothing inside of it. And what I've done in that progress file is to just include some content. So there's some links inside the link area. There's some articles inside the article rather, I have some H2s and some paragraphs. I also have those nested sections that I mentioned to you, and they currently have a class of left and right float. So all that information is in place just to save you some time. And also remember, this video is not necessarily about learning how to create a two-column layout. There are many other Killer Sites videos that will explain that to you, one of which that I have written. And you are encouraged to go back and look at those if any of this is confusing to you. However, it's assumed that if you have come to this video, then you have a basic understanding and a basic knowledge of how to set up a two-column layout inside of CSS. So currently the design looks something like this, and as we saw when we previewed in the browser. If we wanted to see what our final version is going to look like in our finished, remember last time we looked at it and we saw, oh yes, it's got this container and it's got rounded edges and it's got the link that actually moves, and these things do that, and we have two columns here and we have our nested information. However, I have taken the liberty of allowing you to just leech off of my CSS. So in other words, the basic CSS that is working in the progress folder, as you can see here, currently our progress folder contains an index page that I've commented out the link for a second. And the reason I wanted to do that was just to show you what it looks like without the CSS. So it's exactly the same as the skeleton from the previous video. Only difference, I've put in some content in here. Okay, wonderful. Now, we are assuming that you know how to work with basic CSS, and this is really about exploring HTML5 and CSS3. So if you know your basics of CSS, then you would know that if I include this link, which I'm just putting in right now, let's think about that, right? In our Finder, in our progress file, we see the index, and it was not linked to the CSS, but here is the CSS. So my link should be saying, go to the folder called CSS, get me style.css. And if we go to our Dreamweaver file, or in your case, your HTML file, here you can see it's just a regular link tag, as you've always done, css/style.css, and we tell it to be relative style sheet, and the MIME type is text/CSS. So that's perfectly fine. Now, when we preview this in our browser, I'm just going to save that, you can see that, okay, great. We have things looking a whole lot differently, and the reason being is simply because I've got the CSS attached to it. So, without having to go through all of that information, remember, it's the same information that you can get through the Killer Sites CSS layout video, and you're welcome to find that video if you are not comfortable with what we're doing right now. However, looking at the CSS styles for that particular page, what I'm going to be talking to you about and showing you in just a second is the information. Let me just remove that. The information needed to make it look the way it does. So we had all of our skeleton laid out. Here's our nav, right? Here's our article. So the nav is the left column, article is the right column. There's a footer down at the bottom, right? And everything is inside of a content. So if we look at our CSS, you can see some very simple information. I've used the universal selector to make everything margin padding 0. We've got very basic font family, Verdana Geneva or Georgia Times New Roman when needed. The content being the container, the wrapper of sorts, right? I've given it a width, I've given it some margins on the top and the bottom, and I've made it relative. So all this information you should know at this particular moment in time. Now, let me just also mention to you that in that header that we had just written out, logo goes here. Notice what I've done in our design, and if I just move on back here, we saw that this header, this first header, had the logo, had some text, and had some smaller text. So what did I include in here? The logo was just going to be a regular link. And if you look at the ID for logo, you see here it says home, right? But when we previewed in our browser, there's no home there. It doesn't say anything about that. Well, let's look at the CSS just briefly for logo. Here it is. It's absolutely positioned 12 pixels from the top and 20 pixels from the left. It's got a background image, which happens to be the small little logo. It also was given a width and a height of 61 by 62 pixels. Reason being, that's the size of the image. So the logo A tag, or rather the A tag with the ID of logo, is given a square size and positioned absolutely in our header. Also notice that the text indent is set to minus 999, or actually I should say 9,999 pixels. So we've shoved it way off the page, that piece of text. And if you look at the source code, you see there's a home, but we've shoved that text way off so that it is not visible. All we have is the picture, the box. And why did I put that box with the little logo inside of something like this? Well, number one, so that we could position it relatively, absolutely. And also because I wanted it to act like a link. When I put my mouse over it, I want it to give me the finger, so to speak, right? So people will know to activate it. And once we put in some CSS, they'll see it animate as well, so that'll give them every indication to press it. Now right now I've just put in these null dummy links here. They don't do anything, but they make our links act and look like links. And eventually you could create a link back to the home page. That's not an uncommon feature, is to have the little logo actually act as a return to the home page. The H1 is the Killer Sites training that we happen to have up here, and creating killer sites is just a simple paragraph right there. Then we had the anim, so there's our anim, and I've just put in the image, right? So there's an ID with anim, and there's an image in there. Then there is the navigation, and as you well know, navigation is floating left, and the article is floating right. So one left, one right. And to make the footer always appear at the bottom beneath the two, we clear both. Within the footer, there are a number of sections, as you can see here, and each one of them is floating left, but to make the sections at the bottom actually appear this way, we're also going to have to include a little something down here that says clear both as well. And if we go back into Dreamweaver's source code, or any HTML source code, you could see that within my footer, just before the footer closes, I have a small little break tag here. And notice we don't have to make it a self-enclosing tag anymore with HTML5. So here's my small little break tag with a class called clearing. And if we look at our CSS, the clearing class is saying clear both. All right, so we've got all of that information set up. Now, what do I need you to do? Well, we are going to come back in the next video, and I'll show you how we can make all of these elements work properly for every browser.